Paris in the 1700s was the beating heart of Europe. With nearly 600,000 people crammed inside its medieval walls, it was the largest city on the continent, a place of unimaginable wealth and desperate poverty, of royal splendor and revolutionary whispers. In this video, I use modern AI tools to bring historic paintings, engravings, and prints to life, allowing us to shift perspective, change camera angles, and move through the same scenes in ways their original artists never could. First, I want to talk about the river that made Paris possible. This view shows the Seine River cutting through the center of Paris, and standing proudly across it, the Pont Neuf, the oldest bridge in the city. By the early 1700s, this bridge was already over a century old, completed in 1607 under King Henry IV. Despite its name meaning New Bridge, it had become the most famous crossing in all of France. Look closely at the stone arches, the wide pedestrian walkways, the dozens of wooden stalls lining both sides. Merchants sold everything here: books, knives, ribbons, medicine, fake medicine. The air smelled of roasting chestnuts, river mud, and unwashed bodies pressed together. Street performers juggled, pickpockets worked the crowds, beggars called out for coins. But the bridge was also dangerous. Crowds could crush you, fights broke out daily, drunks stumbled into the river. The king's soldiers patrolled, but they couldn't stop the chaos. This was the main artery of Parisian life, and life here was loud, filthy, and electric. The Pont Neuf mattered because it connected the right bank to the left bank, commerce to knowledge, power to rebellion. And remarkably, this is a bridge you can still walk across today, in exactly the same spot, though the wooden stalls are long gone. This view shows Notre-Dame Cathedral rising above the Isle de la Cité, its twin towers visible from nearly every corner of the city. By the mid-1700s, Notre-Dame was over 500 years old, the spiritual center of Catholic France, a place where kings were crowned and the poor came to pray. Step inside and your eyes adjust to the dim light filtering through stained glass. The stone floor is worn smooth by centuries of footsteps. The air is thick with incense, candle smoke, and the smell of damp wool from the crowds packed inside. Priests chant in Latin, women kneel in prayer, beggars sleep in the corners, but Notre Dame was also a place of tension. The Catholic Church held immense power, but by the 1700s, Enlightenment thinkers were questioning that power. Philosophers like Voltaire criticized the church openly. The seeds of revolution were being planted, even here, in the shadow of the altar. Notre Dame mattered because it was the soul of Paris, the place where heaven and earth were supposed to meet. It survived the Revolution, Napoleon's coronation, and 2 world wars. Today, after the 2019 fire, it stands in restoration, still defiant, still sacred. This view shows Les Halles, the central food market of Paris, a place so vital it was called the belly of the city. By the 1700s, this sprawling market had been feeding Parisians for over 400 years, and every morning before dawn, it exploded into life. Farmers rolled in with carts of cabbages, onions, turnips. Fishmongers hauled barrels of eels and oysters from the coast. Butchers hung bloody carcasses on iron hooks. The ground was slick with fish guts, rotting vegetables, and mud mixed with waste. The smell was overwhelming: raw meat, spoiled fruit, human sweat, animal dung. Crowds pressed together, shouting, bargaining, stealing. Housewives haggled with vendors. Street children darted between legs, snatching food. Rats moved openly in broad daylight. Disease spread fast here. Cholera, typhus, smallpox all thrived in the filth. Les Halles mattered because it kept the city alive. Without it, Paris would starve, but it was also a powder keg. When bread prices spiked, riots started here first. In 1789, the women who marched on Versailles began their revolution in these very streets. Today, the old market is gone, replaced by a modern shopping complex, but the memory of those desperate, hungry crowds still echoes underground. This view shows the Louvre Palace stretching along the right bank of the Seine, one of the largest royal residences in Europe. By the early 1700s, King Louis XIV had moved the court to Versailles, but the Louvre remained a symbol of royal power, housing the royal art collection, government offices, and aristocratic apartments. Look at the scale of it. Endless wings of pale stone, rows of tall windows, courtyards large enough to hold 1,000 people. Inside, the walls were covered in tapestries, mirrors, and paintings by the greatest masters of Europe. The floors were polished marble. Servants moved silently through candlelit hallways. But the Louvre was also a place of political intrigue. Courtiers plotted in whispered conversations. Mistresses wielded more power than ministers. Duels were fought in the courtyards at dawn. The king's spies watched everyone. The Louvre mattered because it was the seat of absolute monarchy, the physical embodiment of the king's claim that he ruled by divine right. But that claim was weakening. By the late 1700s, revolution would storm these very gates. Today, the Louvre is the most visited museum in the world, and you can still walk through the same courtyards where kings once held absolute power. This view shows the road leading west out of Paris toward Versailles, the king's palace 12 miles away. By the mid-1700s, under Louis XVI, Versailles had become the center of the universe for the French aristocracy, while Paris itself grew poorer and angrier. Imagine standing on this road in 1750. In the foreground, ragged peasants push carts of firewood toward the city. In the background, gilded carriages roll toward Versailles, carrying nobles in silk and powdered wigs. The contrast is brutal. One world is starving, the other is drowning in champagne. The tension here was palpable. Common people saw the wealth flowing out of Paris and into the hands of a king who never visited them, who lived in a palace with 2,300 rooms while they slept 6 to a bed. Resentment simmered. This road mattered because it was the physical divide between two Frances, the Paris of workers and the Versailles of kings. In 1789, an angry mob of Parisian women would march down this road, drag the king and queen back to Paris, and end the age of Versailles forever. Today, you can still take this route, though now it's a train ride, and Versailles is a museum. This view shows Rue Saint-Honoré, one of the most fashionable streets in Paris, running east to west through the heart of the right bank. By the 1700s, this street was lined with luxury shops selling perfumes, lace, jewelry, and imported fabrics from across the world. Walk down this street and you'd see aristocratic women stepping out of carriages, their skirts so wide they could barely fit through doorways. Their faces were painted white with lead powder. Their hair was piled 2 feet high. Servants followed behind, carrying purchases, but look closer. In the shadows between the grand shops, pickpockets moved, beggars pressed against the walls. Street vendors sold counterfeit goods. The city's violence was never far away. In 1757, a man named Robert Francois Damiens attempted to assassinate King Louis XVI on a street near here, stabbing him with a penknife. Rue Saint-Honoré mattered because it was where money and power were on full display, and where the growing gap between rich and poor became impossible to ignore. During the Revolution, this same street would see the construction of the guillotine. Today, Rue Saint-Honoré is still one of the most expensive shopping streets in the world, though the guillotine is long gone. This view shows Place de Grève, the open square in front of the Hôtel de Ville, the city hall of Paris. By the 1700s, this square had become the primary site of public execution, a place where justice and terror were performed in front of thousands. Picture the scene. A wooden platform in the center of the square, a condemned criminal led up the stairs, hands bound. The crowd pressed forward, shouting, throwing stones, eating roasted nuts. Children sat on their fathers' shoulders to get a better view. The executioner raised his axe. The blade fell, blood pooled on the platform. Executions here were brutal and frequent. Murderers were hanged, thieves were branded. Political prisoners were broken on the wheel, their bones shattered one by one. The smell of death hung over the square for days. Place de Grève mattered because it was where the king's power was made visible, where the state reminded the people what happened when you broke the law. But it also became a gathering place for revolution. In 1789, crowds would storm this square and hang royal officials from the lampposts. Today, this square is called Place de el Hôtel de Ville, and it's a peaceful public space where families gather and children play. But the memory of the blood-soaked cobblestones remains. This view shows the Bastille, a medieval fortress turned royal prison, looming over the eastern edge of Paris. By the 1700s, the Bastille had become the most feared building in France, a place where the king could imprison anyone without trial, simply by signing a lettre de cachet. Look at the massive stone walls, 8 towers rising over 100 feet high, a moat surrounding the entire structure. Inside, prisoners lived in cells with no sunlight, no visitors, no hope. Some were political dissenters. Some were nobles who'd insulted the king. Some were writers whose books had been banned. The air around the Bastille felt heavy. People crossed to the other side of the street when they passed it. Parents told their children stories to frighten them into obedience. Behave, or you'll end up in the Bastille. The Bastille mattered because it was the ultimate symbol of royal tyranny, the proof that the king's power was absolute and unchecked. And on July 14, 1789, an angry mob stormed the Bastille, freed the prisoners, and tore the building down stone by stone. Today, nothing remains of the Bastille except the outline of its foundation, marked in the pavement of the Place de la Bastille. But that single act of defiance changed the world. This view shows the gardens of the Palais Royal, a short walk from the Louvre, one of the most elegant public spaces in Paris. By the late 1700s, these gardens had become a meeting place for philosophers, writers, and revolutionaries, a place where dangerous ideas were spoken aloud. Walk through the gardens and you'd see men in long coats debating under the trees. Coffee houses lined the arcades, filled with smoke and conversation. Pamphlets were sold openly, pamphlets that criticized the king, the church, the entire structure of French society. The police tried to stop it, but the ideas spread faster than they could arrest people. The tension here was intellectual, but no less dangerous. Enlightenment thinkers like Diderot and Rousseau had planted ideas about liberty, equality, and the rights of man. Those ideas were taking root. The Palais Royal mattered because it was where the revolution was born, not in violence, but in conversation. And in 1789, a young lawyer named Camille Desmoulins stood on a table in one of these coffee houses and called the people to arms. Today, the Palais Royal gardens are still open, still beautiful, and still filled with people talking, debating, dreaming. This view shows the Latin Quarter on the left bank, home to the University of Paris, the oldest university in France, founded in the 1100s. By the 1700s, this neighborhood was filled with students, scholars, printers, and booksellers, all crammed into narrow, winding streets. Walk through the Latin Quarter and you'd hear a dozen languages: Latin, French, German, Italian. Students argued philosophy in smoky taverns. Printers worked through the night producing banned books. The air smelled of ink, paper, wine, and ambition. But the Latin Quarter was also poor. Students lived in freezing attic rooms. Many went hungry. Disease spread quickly in the crowded boarding houses. And yet, this was where the future was being written. The Latin Quarter mattered because it was the intellectual engine of Paris, the place where young men learned to think, to question, to challenge authority. Many of the leaders of the French Revolution were educated here. Today, the Latin Quarter is still the heart of Parisian intellectual life, home to the Sorbonne, bookshops, and cafes where students still argue late into the night. Standing here, looking at these reconstructions, it's hard to believe how close the past really is. Paris in the 1700s feels distant, but the streets are still there. The bridges still stand. The stones remember. If there's another city, another moment, another scene you'd like me to reconstruct, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear where you want to go next. Again, thank you so much.